Hello, Hockaday. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Sui Pham. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a freshman at USC, and I will be the moderator of today's panel, The Hungry Scientists, Women in STEM. To start, I would like to emphasize that we use an inclusive definition of women and welcome trans, genderqueer, and non-binary people. Unfortunately, women are not treated the same as men in the science field, or any male-dominated field for that matter. To really get an inside look at this issue, we, the Society of Physics students at USC, have invited speakers at various stages of their careers and education to talk about their experiences as women in STEM. Now, before we start, I'd like to note that this panel will be recorded, so we kindly ask that you turn off your microphones and your cameras for the presentations. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can at the end. Our first speaker today is Dr. Thompson.
Hello, my name is Dr. Audie Thompson. I'm an assistant, my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Arkansas. I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Alcorn State University, a master's degree in microbiology from Alabama State University, and a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Mississippi Medical Center. My responsibilities as assistant professor are to conduct research, teach classes in chemical engineering, and to advise graduate students as they pursue their PhD and master's, as well as mentor and guide undergraduate students. That's it, Twee.
All right, and thank you for sharing, Dr. Thompson. Anansa, go ahead. Anansa, go ahead, sorry.
Hi, my name is Anansa Keaton. I'm a senior at USC studying physics and astronomy. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I currently am doing research with Dr. Rhodes, doing helioseismology work. We're analyzing patterns in, we're analyzing harmonic oscillators in the sun to see, we're just recording and seeing what happens with the sun. Yeah, that's all that I'm doing right now. During the summer, I worked with the astronomy department at Cornell using the Hale mass function, analyzing or trying to predict densities of galaxies and seeing which conditions are favorable for galaxies to form. Yeah, that's what I'm doing so far.
All right, next up we have Giselle Lopez.
Hi everyone, my name is Gisselle. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a junior studying biomedical engineering at USC. Currently I'm on a leave of absence, but I'm still involved with extracurriculars. So I have a leadership position in the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. I'm involved in the Associated Students of Biomedical Engineering, and I also volunteer with LA STEM, where we introduce STEM topics to 5th grade classrooms in the LA area via Zoom. And I guess a little bit about me. Last summer after freshman year, I was able to conduct research at the University of Virginia, and I participated in an REU, which stands for Research Experiences for Undergrads. And through that, I was able to work on a project that helped bring mental health treatment to people with social anxiety disorder. And it was a really great experience where I was able to learn more about engineering and psych and clinical psychology to bring treatment options that are more accessible to people suffering from social anxiety.
Thank you for sharing, Giselle. Elizabeth, would you like to go?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Twee. My name is Elizabeth. I use she, her pronouns, and I graduated from Hockaday in 2017. I'm wearing a little jacket. You can see the little unicorn and the whole crest, right? And at Hockaday, I was involved with Science Olympiad with Mr. De Oliveira, and I took physics. Well, I took physics with Mr. D, Dr. Bartlett, and Mr. Taylor, and so really I just got really into physics in high school, and it was really fun. And now I go to USC and I study physics and computer science. And last summer I did an REU like Giselle, and I did in the physics department at the University of Texas at Dallas. And so I was studying the interplay of superconductivity and the quantum Hall effect in a graphene-based device. And then this summer, I was again going to do an REU at Cornell, like Anansa, but then COVID just shut down everything, right? So instead I was doing like a theoretical project that I'm continuing to work on right now. I'm doing Monte Carlo simulations in Python to better understand the effect of degeneracies on thermal quantities like free energies and entropies.
Okay, I want to thank Twee for having me, and I just want to say a little bit more about myself as a professor and my experiences. It was good to hear that the undergraduate students have done REUs. When I was an undergraduate, I was fortunate to participate in 3, and that's where I basically nurtured my desire for, or I guess my desire for science and my love for research. And so that continued from undergraduate to graduate school. And that's why I attended graduate school. But to tell you a little bit more about what I do now, when I said I mentor students, I've been mentoring undergraduates since graduate school. And that's what allowed me to meet Twee. And so I get to share my passion for research, but also what I've gone through in the STEM fields. And so just to give you a little bit about the research I do, we have 3 main projects. We look at water filtration, we fabricate membranes to remove toxins. We do drug delivery, and we focus on delivering drugs to the ocular environment in your eye. So we attach medications to contact lenses. And then we also look at delivering nanoparticles to treat cancer cells. So that tells you a little bit about my group. I have a few PhD students, 1 master's students, and I also welcome high school students into my group. And so that tells you about STEM and work and so forth. But I do want to touch on a little bit about microaggression, if that's okay, Twee, if I do that this time. Okay, so graduate school, my experience in STEM was more of racial biases. And so I won't touch on that unless someone actually has a question. But when it comes to imposter syndrome, what that means is that you have a thought of inadequacy or doubt about your skills. And so my first experience of that was when I actually started at the University of Arkansas in a tenure track position. And I was excited about being in the position, but as things, I guess, moved forward, I started teaching classes and having students in the lab, I got overwhelmed with all of the responsibilities, and I did feel like I was inadequate. And sometimes that can come from external experiences. And what I mean by that is that women can be unfairly compared to their counterparts, and their counterparts can't be provided with resources that we may not be I guess, have access to. And so I did have that feeling or doubtfulness that I would be successful. And so now I'm in the middle of my 3rd year and things have gone well. And as the undergraduate can tell you, with their PIs, we have to get funding, right? And so to conduct my research, and I've been able to get some mini grants, and I was actually having a conversation with my mentor today, and she asked me to be a PI of one of her large projects. And so things are working out. And so you get past the imposter syndrome, but I really felt like I didn't belong at some point, you know? And so you have those moments, whether again, it's external or internal, because internal, you put so much pressure on yourself as you're going through your profession, as you're going through school, that you feel like you're inadequate. So even without someone saying something, you just may feel that. And so I define it according to what I've seen at conferences, and I know other women experience it, because but first I didn't know that it was called, you know, that I was experiencing imposter syndrome. You just think you're going through those valleys, like you may have gone through high school or you're going through a sport and so forth. And somebody was like, no, I felt imposter syndrome. I was like, that is what I was feeling. And it can be a stressful moment. So I won't touch on any other topics. Twee, I'll let the other panelists discuss that. and I'll be open to questions later on in the panel.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that you brought up imposter syndrome. It's something that nobody thinks is like important or like bad until they get firsthand experience. So thank you for bringing that up. Anansa, the floor is yours.
So I guess I'll talk about just how I got into physics and how I found my passion for physics. Honestly, and I know this doesn't happen for everyone, but I found it pretty early. Like I remember reading books about, space and space travel and thinking that like this was something, something that seems like fiction is, attainable. People actually go out and do these things and research physics and go to space. And so that's why I initially found my love for it. But as I've, gone through high school and gone through college, I realized, how, as lofty as space dreams are, you kind of get knocked down to reality when you start, pursuing it as a field. And so I can say that my first run-in with, stereotypes and, just negative, impacts were while I was applying to college. A lot of it was, I have an intersection of a lot of identities. I'm Black and a woman, and I'm from a low income background. So I found a lot of my troubles were, I can't separate those experiences because I'm not sure which one would have made it, worse or better. But I remember specifically while I was applying to USC and I got in, I had too many people come up and tell me that you only got in because you were either Black or a woman. And just discounting all of the hard work that I've done, the 4 years, working up to this and knowing that I'm going into a field that not only is hard, that I don't see a lot of myself in. But despite that, I persisted. And then, going into USC again, not the most, diverse environment, especially in physics, I found myself struggling with the material right off. And I think something that's important to touch on is that when you have already, are prone to imposter syndrome, and then you feel that you're not as good, on paper as other people are in STEM, it starts to wear away at your confidence, whether or not you're supposed to be in the field. And I think an important thing to note is that if you're not good at it right away, that's okay. Like STEM is not intuitive. No one knows math, like no one's born knowing math or physics. And it's something that you have to learn and it's something you have to get better at. So even despite, even if the imposter syndrome is real and you aren't as good, that shouldn't stop you from pursuing what you want to do. There's nothing that says that you can't get better. And that's something I definitely experienced in my freshman and sophomore year is that, especially with these, weeder classes when you're competing with, maybe 100 people in lecture and you're all, a number and, you're all trying to get the best grade. You have to recognize what you're really here for, which is learning physics. It's learning what you want to do for the rest of your life or just learning something that's interesting to you. So I think that's, I guess, my takeaway that I've gotten, going through college is that it's okay not to be good at it. It's okay. You don't have to be exceptional at it just because you're a woman and you feel like you have something to prove. But yeah, that's been my experience. And I think that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I think that's something I needed to hear right about now with the exams going on. Like I just need to push through. Next up, we have Giselle.
Yeah, I definitely relate to a lot of what Dr. Thompson and Anansa said. For me, going from high school where I was successful in my classes, and not that I used grades to equate them to intelligence, but it was a way for me to measure my success. And so going from high school to college, I immediately faced difficulties in academics. I wasn't getting high grades. I was falling behind. In lectures, sometimes they'll post the the curve, and I'd see that, oh, I'm below average. Like, how do I go from here? And so like you have resources where there's office hours where you meet with your professors and your TAs. And I was doing that, but I was still finding that I was struggling. And I think part of it stemmed to just doubting myself and comparing myself to others, which is really unfair to do to yourself because you your peers, you only see them for a set amount of the day, right? You don't have a full picture of their life, and so you don't see what struggles they're going through, and it's not fair to you to think, well, this person is successful on this test or this problem set, like why wasn't I able to achieve that same success? Like at a certain point I reached my breaking point where it's like I have to focus on myself. I can't think about how others are doing because it takes away from the energy that I can devote towards my own um, academic success. And to touch upon like imposter syndrome, like Dr. Thompson, I had no idea what that was until recently. Um, I thought it was just like something that I was going through myself, but when I was applying to REU's like spring semester freshman year, I had applied to this one program at UVA that I thought at that time really aligned with my interests and BME just in general. And unfortunately, I wasn't accepted to that program, but they emailed me asking me if I was interested in applying to the program, which I ultimately completed. And at first, I just doubted when I received the news that I was accepted to the second program. I just, for some reason, doubted myself and thought, well, why did they accept me? Like, this is a mistake. I don't deserve this. Like, I'm looking at my GPA and it's not the best. Like, what did I do to get here? But then throughout the summer, like talking with grad students and the other people in the cohort, like I realized I'm not alone in that struggle. We all face difficulties, and just know that you're not alone when you are having trouble. We don't broadcast our difficulties, so it's hard to find that with other people. But something that's helped me is confiding with my friends and people who I trust to like vent my struggles, and just hear their support. It really helps.
Thank you for sharing, Giselle. And last but not least, we have Elizabeth Zhou.
I think what was really great about going to Hockaday, going to a single-sex school, was that even though we still like go about and like in our consciousness, we like hear the stereotype that women don't belong in STEM, it was like that effect was lessened because I was like surrounded by like women in the classroom, and here I'm using like the gender inclusive term for women, and that was like really great and like really affirming, because everyone I saw around me like raising their hand participating in class was a woman. And so then when I made that transition to like college, and as I'm like going higher, as I was going higher through my like physics and computer science classes, I was taking this intersection of two like extremely male dominated fields, literally in physics, for those who like graduate with a BS degree in physics, 20% of them are women. So that was like a sharp drop, and that was like really weird to get used to. And I often thought about it in the sense of the like implicit bias that like others may face, others may like turn towards me. I think oftentimes I would wonder if other people like doubt my intelligence, if other people automatically see me as lesser, and I would feel this need to like prove myself and to like show that I am worthy and that I do belong in this space. And then I also do understand if other people turn that attitude towards me, because I see how I like have internalized that and how I like apply that to other people. Like when I see other women around me or see like people in my classes, then I like assume that the guys are like automatically better or smarter, and it sucks to feel that way, but it's helped me like be aware of my bias, and then like help me like see how can I overcome this. And like what has helped me is like good mentorship, and I highly like recommend that you like seek this out. It's always affirming when other people like encourage you. And so like at USC, I have like a professor, Eli Levinson Falk, and he's really supportive about like diversity and inclusion. And so last year, I was going to give a talk at a physics conference, and then he knew that I was going to go to the conference, and so I'd like talked to this professor a couple of times before, but I'd never actually had a class with him. But then he like reached out to me and he was like, oh hey, like by the way, at these like conferences, usually in the evenings, there will be like social events, and so there the professional and like social lines will be like kind of blurred. And so he was saying like, if anyone is like a jerk to you, feel free to like let me know, like reach out to me. And then he was saying like, if I want to talk more about like specific details of like what happened, then I could talk to like a graduate student in his group, Darian, and she's really cool. And so it was really sweet that he was reaching out in that way. And he was saying like, or if instead you wanted someone to like, someone with authority, he was like, yeah, I could like lay down the law, you know, like go confront this person. And I was like, oh, cool. And so like, it meant a lot that this professor like reached out to me and he was like, yeah, I'm like here to support you, you know, like supporting women and women in STEM. And then this semester, I'm actually having him for the first time as a professor. He's teaching quantum mechanics, and Anansa and I are in his class. He was like really cool. Literally like for our exam, he gave us like extra credit for like making memes. And so he literally gave us like 3 points extra credit. Yeah, like Anansa knows. Yeah, it was really cool. And then even though like the conference I was going to go to was this spring. So even though it was canceled because of COVID, understandably, we don't know what would have happened. Hopefully it would have been a good experience, but I still have been able to like reach out to him. And I've talked with him before, like when I felt as though like people were like mansplaining to me, or I've talked with him when in one of my classes, people were like making jokes related to like the underrepresentation of women in STEM. And I was like, oh, this isn't great. But then when I talked with him about it, he was like really understanding and like listened to me. And he offered like tangible courses of action for moving forward. And he was saying that like, if later down the line things got worse, then I could continue talking with him about it and he could help file an anonymous complaint on my behalf. And so that like meant a lot that he was like thinking of like ways to like move forward and that he was like reaching out as an ally, and I like felt really supported. And then in addition to like how other people can like help us, I think what has helped me most is like since like going to college, when I'm like surrounded by like so many people, like at Hockaday, our like max class size was like 20 most, right? But then like going to college when there's like lots of people in the class, it became a lot scarier for me to like answer questions, to like raise my hand. But what's really helped me is just push myself to do the scary thing. And then as I've like done that, and as every time I like push myself a little bit to like ask a question or to like answer a question, then I like see my like confidence building, and that's been really affirming.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Elizabeth. I think everyone had some really inspiring, powerful things to say, and to hear about how all of you pushed through and surrounded your circumstances was amazing. Like, hats off to all of you guys, truly. So we're gonna start with some questions for the panelists, and for those in the audience, I highly encourage that you submit your questions now if you haven't already. The first question is, what inspired you to pursue a /education? And Dr. Tom, we can start with you.
Okay. When I was younger, my mom introduced science to me. She bought me, I think, my first microscope at 6. So I always had that passion for science, or the interest in exploring new things and learning new things. But my passion for research developed during my REU, and Giselle explained that a research experience for undergraduates. So those opportunities have been around for years. And so when I did that, I knew that the lab was for me. And so I wanted to continue on being able to answer questions, ask questions, and contribute to science. And so that's where my passion, why I wanted to pursue a career in research. And the path of academia, being a professor, it aligned with my passion to mentor students, especially girls and so forth. And so being able to show them that you can persevere, you can make it. I was able to do that by being in academia. And so that's where it started. And that's why it continues, because I still have opportunities like this to hear about success stories and help students get to where they want to go and pursue their goals.
Yeah, Elizabeth, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, how I decided to get into physics was because my first year I took physics with Mr. D, and then my second year I decided that I liked it, and so I doubled up on science. I took AP Physics 2 with Dr. Bartlett, and then AP Chemistry with Dr. Lawson. And so I'd never taken 2 science classes before at the same time, but it was really cool because oftentimes we would cover the same subject, but from those 2 different lenses, right? So we talk about electrochemistry, and then at the same time in Dr. Bartlett's class, we would talk about electrostatics or and so oftentimes we would even use the same equation. So it was cool to see how math connected them. But then we would see it from those very different conceptual explanations. And so I really loved that. I remember having this moment where we were learning about electromagnetism, and we were talking about how how those 2 concepts connected. And then we were watching this video, and then when they were saying that C is equal to what? It's 1 over the square root of epsilon naught mu naught, right? The constants for, oh my God, there's a good chance I'm gonna get this wrong because they have very, oh God, okay, it's the vacuum permittivity something and then something constant. It's a very wordy name that kind of makes no sense, but okay, cool. Dr. Bartlett or Mr. D can say in the chat if you don't want to drop it. And so I really loved taking those 2 classes at once. And it was cool because Dr. Bartlett and Dr. Lawson had pretty different teaching styles as well. And that Dr. Lawson was very structured, and she would pull up presentations or websites, but then Dr. Bartlett, on the other hand, he used to be a college professor, right? And so he was more just at the board. To me, it felt like he was just improvising, pulling this from nowhere. And I was wow, this is incredible. And so after that, I thought okay, great. I'm gonna be a high school teacher. Maybe one day I'll even come back to teach at Hockaday. And I was cool. Between chemistry and physics, these are both really cool, but I really like the math, so I'm gonna go with physics. And then since then, I've also tacked on the computer science major because I see how these programming skills definitely supplement my work in research, especially since this summer. I never planned to be a theoreticist. I always wanted to do experimental work, but then because of COVID, since we could no longer go in the lab, it's been really useful to have those programming skills because then I've been able to take on this theoretical project. And so moving forward, my plan is to go to graduate school and then to go into industry.
All right. And this is a question from Marshall Bartlett. He asked, I would be very interested in hearing from our panelists how they made and nurtured relationship with mentors. How did each of them find mentors to support them? Any bad experiences with them? And this is for everyone on the panel.
Sweet, if I could start with that question. I don't know if the participants noticed, but Elizabeth mentioned mentors and she talked about her professor, and then I mentioned mentors as well. And so I just want to reiterate to the students that mentoring, finding a mentor and having a mentor is throughout your career. It starts as early as you in high school, as you see in undergrad, and even being in my career, I have mentors, and you're going to have multiple mentors. You're going to have different types of mentors that speak to different aspects of your career or what you're going through. And so as you notice, Elizabeth was like, well, he said he would stand up for me. So you want that type of mentor. That's called an advocate, right? And then you want that mentor that has gone through the path that you're going so they can give you some advice. And so how you nurture those relationships, like she mentioned, she go to conferences. you want to, I know some of us are introverts, but those are the opportunities you find different places where you can meet people. And some people will volunteer to be your mentor, and some you ask to be your mentor. And so I've been fortunate where I am now that I was able to choose some mentors. And then one of my best mentors chose me, and she has been great. And so you'll have those opportunities. When it comes to bad experiences, we have to understand the difference between a mentor and sometimes an advisor. When I was in graduate school, my advisor was just an advisor. He was not a mentor. And so because at that time I was looking for a mentor, I would consider him a bad mentor because he didn't really understand the things that I was going through as a graduate student, a female student, or a person of color. And so he would even say things that were, to me, that were inappropriate when it comes to my religion, you know? And so so I have had a bad experience, but I would consider him more as an advisor. And so you want to keep that in mind. You do have bad experiences, you take it, you learn from it, and you move on. So that's what I wanted to share about mentorship. Thank you, Twee.
I found my mentor, Eli, because in my first year, I was looking into research opportunities, and he does quantum computing research, and I was like, that sounds very cool. And so I want to do that. And so literally my first year, I was in the middle of taking our intro mechanics class, and I like reached out to him and I was like, hi, I want to do quantum research now. And he was like, nope, we can't have you. They didn't have enough space in their like laboratory. And so like looking back, that makes sense. But I was like, no, let's set up a meeting. And so literally like looking back at like first year me, I'm like, wow, I was like really bold in doing that. And that I was like, no, let's still set up a meeting. Like I was ready to fight him, right? But then the fact that he responded at all, that he was like, okay, cool, we can set up a meeting. And he was like, I can help you with your course plan or with your like choice of major, any of that. And so I was like, wow, this is like really generous. And he was like pretty tactful and like deterring me and being like, we're not talking about research, but I will still help you. And so I was like, oh, he's a good man. And so what I would suggest about like mentorship, as like Dr. Thompson said, is that like mentorship and like networking is ongoing. It's like consistent. And so I think it's really important to like nurture those relationships. They're not just like a one-off thing. It's not like a one-time meeting, but rather one really good tip I picked up at like a career workshop is that like after you have like your initial contact with someone, to set a reminder in your calendar for 3 to 4 months out. So then you can like follow up with that person. And what I think has been super helpful for me, and what's been like really effective for me, is that like I give them like some updates about my life, and then also tell them like how I followed up on like the tips or advice that they gave me. And so like that way we show that like we honor and we actually like appreciate their advice, and like and then like that's really helpful. For like bad mentors, bad experiences, once I was like mentored by someone, and she was also like Chinese and a woman. So this was like one of our like USC professors in physics. And so like it was really affirming to see someone who like shared two aspects of identity with me. And so she was really like encouraging to me. She encouraged me to like reach to apply for like scholarships and opportunities. And so she was like affirming to me, but then I'd heard like graduate students in my lab say that like she's really demanding, or she's not like, she doesn't treat her graduate students in her lab well. And so I had to grapple with like the fact that like, okay, she's like encouraging to me, but also like maybe not necessarily like someone I'd want to work with. And so what I would encourage y'all to keep in mind is that like when looking for mentors or like networking, you get to choose first and foremost who you want to like associate with and who you want to talk with. And so like you get to make those connections on your own. And it's not as though like we have to like hold on to any connection that comes our way. In the end, like we get to choose what works best for us.
I'd just like to add something really quickly. With my experience with the mentorships, it's like Dr. Thompson was saying, it's really important to find someone who can relate to your situation. Because I had gone to the, what was it, the QWIP conference, the Conference for Women in Physics, about 2 years ago. And I met this postdoc, Brittany Kamai, and I related a lot to her situation. Or it's not so much that we had the same situation, but we had similar like struggles. And her situation was that she didn't get into physics until her senior year of college. And that's why I found her situation really unique, and how that there's multiple ways to do something. And I think that's what stood out to me the most, is that, like, you know, with physics, you think there's this one track, kind of, this is what you do, this is what you do, and then this happens afterwards. But with my mentor, she kind of taught me that, like, you don't have to decide right now, or you don't have to do everything at the same pace that everybody else is doing. And that's what really makes her special to me as a mentor. And then my other mentor is actually Edward Rhodes, and he's like one of my biggest advocates, because he's always, again, also like, you can do this another way if you need to. Like, you don't have to follow what everybody else is doing. There's ways to do this and that work for you. And so I guess that's what I'm saying. I think it's more important to get someone who can advocate for you and relate to your situation, or at least help you get out of it. Not saying that the situation is bad, but someone who can make the best out of what you have, you know, your strengths and your weaknesses.
Yeah, that's excellent. This question's for Giselle. It's, what activities and experiences would you suggest getting involved in during upper school and college?
In high school, upper school, I did student government, and I also was heavily involved in this club that raised money for pediatric cancer. And like in upper school and college, I think it's important to involve yourself in leadership positions where you're able to build your communication and teamwork skills. It's important to be able to work with others, and it really adds value whether you're going to academia or industry after undergrad to have that skill set. And something else that I did during high school was I got the opportunity to do this internship at a hospital, and I was able to work in a pediatric office, and it was really valuable because like at the end of those 6 weeks I realized I don't want to be a pediatrician. Like all my life I had thought I'm going to grow up and I'm going to go to med school and be a pediatrician, work with kids. I love kids. Like this is perfect. But throughout that work experience I realized, okay, the set and the pace of the job and its duties aren't really for me, and I feel like I just don't see myself in this position. So think about your interests and your passions and try to find opportunities that cater to those, so that you can see whether it's something that you like or don't. I think either case is really valuable. Knowing what you like is knowing what you don't like is just as valuable as knowing what you do. And it's good to have that experience before you head into college because it saves you both time and money. Like I thought I wanted to major in biochem, and after that work experience at the hospital, I like was able to save myself that time and really throw myself into something else that catered to my passions.
Yeah, speaking of research internships, Ashley said, "Hi, I noticed all of the panelists mentioned research internships. I was wondering if they could explain the process of applying for one."
Um, so for me, I'm not necessarily sure what the process is for high school, but in college, freshman year, I was able to attend this conference, and they had a graduate track where there was a bunch of representatives from grad schools. And after networking with them, I was able to find out, okay, like this school has this RU program and it aligns with my interests. And so, um, like application deadlines vary from November to February, but just consider what the research you're interested is in and what institutions or locations you're also interested in, and be ready to have letters of recommendations, um, build relationships with professors so that they can advocate for you as a student. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Twee, can I add to that? Do we have time? Okay. For high schoolers, some universities have formal programs similar to what Giselle just referred to, research experience for undergraduates. And so you can look on their website and apply like that. Universities that do not have formal programs, you can contact professors so that you can, like if you look on their website and you see that their research may be something that you want to do, you can contact that professor and ask if they would allow you to work in their lab to get some research experience. And you can do that at even at companies. You can contact them and see if they will allow you to shadow, to visit, and so forth. So I would say reaching out, even if you don't see a formal application, as she was referring to, and that'll allow you to rule out things like she said that you don't want to do. I had a friend that did an internship at a deodorant company, and she says, I don't want that on my tombstone. And so a lot of times you'll do things and you'll rule them out, like I don't want to do that. Or I'll have students that'll be in the lab and they realize research is not for them. And so you want to keep an open mind to different opportunities and try different things to rule things out, as well as to see what you like. And that'll help you basically narrow that path to what you want to do for your career long term.
Yeah, so these two questions are kind of the same, but Courtney, Catherine, Margot said, what advice would you give to students interested in STEM careers but don't know what path to follow? And Alex Cox said, more specifically, for Anansa, is there anything you did or that you know of to get involved in the astronomy world in high school or before college?
Before college, I think what I did, I'm being completely honest, I didn't have a bunch of physics experience going into college. I wasn't in the position and I wasn't privileged enough to have like, I was, you know, going to a high school in like Arizona. Physics isn't really a thing. Like if anything, it's usually biology based. Like that wasn't something I could do. So in high school, I didn't have that much experience. Most of my experience came from just like self, interest and everything. But then I think summers are where you really, like summers in between high school and college, or, summers in between years in college is where you really find research experiences. And my first one was actually volunteering at an observatory, at a local observatory in Arizona. And they specialize in like science communication and like getting the public exposed to like, just science and astronomy and stuff. And so that was my first, introduction to that. And I think it's easier to find research or just what you're interested in based on science communication because, that's how people get interested in the subjects that they want to do anyway. It's like who explain like what interests you the most and who can like, explain that to you in a nice way. And I think that's why I liked astronomy. Like I liked physics at first, but then the more I went through my college career, I noticed that I like cosmology instead. And I think a lot of it was because when I explained these concepts to people, I found that interest in cosmology. But that's kind of a side tangent. Finding research experience for me was a little bit difficult. It got easier as I went through college and made these connections at conferences and just honestly pestering professors to let me into their research group. Like with Rhodes, it was like 2 years until I got into his research group. And because it was so full all the time, but I just kept asking, and not because like, don't be annoying about it, but like, be persistent about it. Like, I really want to do research with you. This is what I want to do. Is there any way I can even like observe one of your research meetings or whatever? So I think it's more of just being persistent and finding different ways to do research. You don't necessarily have to do it through, RUs online where you're competing with a lot of people. Honestly, getting that personal connection and trying to do research, just one-on-one, or just, finding what you're interested in is more important than, getting into these RUs, I feel like.
Yeah, Eleanor Lockhart said, how would you recommend we ask researchers to help in their lab? Specifically, what phrasing or what kind of people should we reach out to, university professors or private researchers? And this one's for Dr. Thompson.
So when you email them, just be upfront what you're looking for, why you're doing it. Some professors don't like it when students says, oh, I want to use it as a resume builder. To be honest, it doesn't offend me, but to avoid terms like that, so you just want to say, hey, I'm looking to learn, increase my skill set, figure out what I want to do for the future. All those phrases are appropriate. During COVID, I would do the same thing. And the reason is, like right now, we're on restrictions of allowing visitors in our lab, but there are labs that do computational or theoretical things that can be done by the computer or remotely. And so they're still welcoming students into their group. And so I would still contact them, and they will let you know whether it's possible to still volunteer or get involved while, during COVID. So I know, and it's the same thing for companies. I know Intel and Apple, they had experience for high school students, undergrad. It was all remote. They put them with the team. They had to pitch an idea and they had a presentation. I enjoyed every bit of it. So there's still opportunities, even though we're still in this pandemic. So definitely still reach out, use those phrases, and let them know that you're interested in trying to learn. Oh, no apology needed, Eleanor.
And we only have time for one more question, and that is from Ria G. It's, what advice would you give for handling situations with people, or specifically males, that are being demeaning of your skills in a workplace?
Tweet, may I start with that one?
Yes, of course.
For one, because you all are listening to this panel and you've heard how people have experienced this, you know that it can happen. It may not ever happen to you, but if it does, you're not the first, you won't be the last. So I will advise, you want to be, of course, respectful. You don't want to burn bridges, but you also want to acknowledge that you want to be disrespected as well. When Anansa was talking about her graduate experience, I remember my first class, it was biochemistry, and I failed the first test. And that was the reason, because I was studying, I was watching the Olympics. I have to admit it. And the professor came out, he says, well, my colleagues told me that a minority couldn't be successful in biochemistry. And that hurt. But I didn't disrespect him, and I knew it was probably true that they had said that. And so you move on, you pick your battles, you move on, and you figure it out, and you figure out what those places are for you, and you just remember your worth. We talked about the imposter syndrome. It happens, you get over it, and you move on, and you just prepare yourself for the next step. I hope that helps, but definitely you just move on. You be respectful, you don't allow anybody to disrespect you, and you move on to the next phase.
And I think specifically, like I was saying before, when I was told that the only reason I got into USC was because I was either a woman or Black or both, to me, it's like, I don't have to, even if that was the case, what does that, provide to them? What does that prove to them? If I'm doing it for me and I'm doing research because I love it, what does that, that doesn't concern them at all. And I guess it's just like, it does hurt at the time when people tell you that, your achievements and your accomplishments don't matter because of whatever your identity is. But it's not for them. You're not doing research for them. You're not going to these colleges for them. Yeah.
I think when these things happen, or when I was in my artificial intelligence class, and then the professor and a student had made jokes related to underrepresentation of women in tech, I felt like really like small, you know? And so I was like sitting there and I like wanted to like say something snappy, you know, like say something like really clever to like point out this like problematic behavior, but in like a respectful way, right? And so I was like, oh, I gotta say something in this like Zoom chat, right? But then I was like, you know what? You don't have to deal with that right now. Like, Elizabeth, you just take care of yourself right now. And so I was like, okay, let's just take it easy, process this. And then what was really helpful was that like afterwards I had reached out to Eli and been like, hey, this upsetting thing happened. Can we like talk about it? And he was like, yeah, okay, cool. And so I would suggest like talking about it like with your friends, whether or not they like share that like aspect of identity with you. Just like anyone that you trust that you know will respect you and your opinion and like what happened to you. I think that's really helpful. I think afterwards, when like talking about these experiences, oftentimes it's hard to encapsulate how like the extent of like the betrayal and like humiliation that like you feel. Sometimes when I like talk about it afterwards, especially if I'm talking about it with like guys, then I feel as though I'm like grasping for words, and I feel as though like in talking about it afterwards, I feel as though I've like overreacted. But then I encourage you to remember that like whatever you feel is valid and you don't need to try and judge or change how you feel. And so I highly recommend talking about it with like people around you. And that always helps.
All right. I want to thank all of you in the audience for being so attentive, and I'd like to thank this panelists especially for their time. We hope that by listening to these panelists, these incredible women, which many of you may be able to relate to, you'll feel more empowered and encouraged to pursue a career without fear of discrimination based on your gender. Reach for the stars, do the impossible, you know? So, and one last thing before we go, I'd like to add that if you'd like to reach out to speakers, their contact information will be pasted in chat, so feel free to check that out. Otherwise, you guys have a wonderful day.